Good morning. I don't know if you like to watch. True crime dramas. It's one of the most popular type of stuff going on TV at the moment, and we're going to do a bit of that ourselves for the next month, this month of October. And I'm going to go straight in, and it's one of the most crazy claims of the Christian faith, and it is this: Jesus died, he was crucified, died, buried, and rose again from the dead. Let's just put it on the table. Let's just go straight in with what we believe, with what we say. Jesus was crucified, died, buried, and rose again from the dead. The rest of the stuff is almost like extras, But this is the main thing about the Christian faith. This is the Christian faith. And in some ways, it sounds more like fantasy novel or superhero films, doesn't it? It sounds to a modern mind, to our skeptical thinking, it sounds a bit more outlandish, especially now that we're educated and enlightened. And, surely we are past this now, right? And society accepts the idea that Jesus was a teacher or a philosopher or even some sort of mystic mage of some sort. Society accepts that idea. But to say that someone physically died and then physically rose again is incredibly outlandish. It's almost absurd. Maybe your school friends would say this with you if you speak to them at school. Maybe you speak at college or university, or maybe in your workplace. Or maybe that if you have this conversation with family members in your household, that they will also just sort of think, this is absurd. This is just an outlandish thing that you believe. And maybe they just tolerate what you're doing, and they just sort of accept that, oh yeah, you're the religious one in the family, or you're the one that does this, And I don't know, but I've got lots of friends and other family members who would probably say, look, you're stupid for believing that stuff. They don't always say it to your face, do they? But, they're just thinking, you're just a bit naive to believe all of this stuff. Maybe you have questions about your faith, too. Maybe. My job today, I get to just lay the foundation for the case that we're going to be looking at. It's going to be carried on for the next 3 weeks. We're going to just build on it every week. We've got different people speaking, and we're just going to build on this every week. But my job today is just to give you an overview and a summary, if you like, of the case, and also to give us some ideas, some points, some targets, some ways to think about what we're going to be looking at today. And the first thing I want to do is I want to tell you about somebody named J. Warner Wallace. He was a homicide detective. He was based in L.A., and he specialized in forensic, I have to read it now because I get the phrase correctly, forensic statement analysis. Now, forensic statement analysis, for the uneducated and non-police force people among us, forensic statement analysis is the special skill of being able to analyze the words people use, the pronouns, the timings, the way they infer, the things they leave out, you specialize in listening and assessing the language that somebody uses. And it's a skill, it's a science, so he specialized in that. And he also worked on a cold case. He was in the cold case team. And so for those of us who have not watched any cold case programs on the BBC or Netflix or ITV, because there's plenty of them, for any of us who've not watched cold cases, a cold case, of course, is where someone has been killed and they still haven't solved the crime. Now, a homicide is the one cause of death that if it's not solved, it's always left open. It's always open. Other causes of death, natural causes, suicide, accidental death, it's a case closed. But when it's a homicide, it's open until it's solved. But they're cold because there's not much going on with them. So a cold case. So it's a cold case. And he worked in the team with cold cases. That was his main job. That's what he worked on. And he basically says this about himself. He says, "My friends knew me as an angry atheist, a skeptic who thoroughly dissected Christianity and the Christian worldview. I was curious about the Gospels, but not as someone interested in ancient philosophy or an imaginary sage, but as an investigator. because he began to realize that the death of Jesus is the most famous case of a missing corpse in the whole world. It's the most famous missing corpse case ever. Ever. It's just like an unsolved crime. That's how he viewed it. And he began to dig into it. And sometimes when you deal with a cold case, you have little or no forensic evidence still around. And when you deal with a cold case, sometimes you have it where the witnesses at the time have all passed away as well. So you can be investigating crimes that happened a long time ago when there's little or no physical forensic evidence in the way that you would use for other contemporary crimes. And he thought, I'm going to look at this case not as somebody who wants to know more about Jesus, not as somebody who wants to all of a sudden have had this incredible encounter. He wasn't someone who felt like we've had a really traumatic season in our life and I just need something to help me. He wasn't somebody who was looking for purpose in life. He was looking at this to determine once and for all, can I investigate this using the rules and laws that are allowed in court, and can I apply that to this case? So that's what we're going to do this morning. We're going to do a little bit of that, and it's a little bit different kind of series. We haven't done series like this in a while, but this series we're going to be looking at the basis of our faith. He felt if he employed the rules as a cold case investigator, he would be able to discover more accurately what actually happened with Jesus and the resurrection. And of course, when you have any investigation, there are rules to follow, aren't there? You can't just make it up as you go along. There's certain rules. And he's written a book about it called Cold Case Christianity. He's written a number of books, but we're using the book Cold Case Christianity as the basis for the stuff that we're going to talk about today. And if you'd like to look it up, purchase a copy. We get 10% commission of everyone you buy. So buy 100 of them. No, I'm just kidding. No commission. We honestly don't get any commission. So Cold Case Christianity. And he writes about his journey and his investigations as a detective. And you might ask yourself, why are we doing this? Well, here's why we're doing this series. We want New Life Church to be a safe place where people can ask questions and they can talk about what it means to have faith. Because sometimes people think that faith is the absence of reason or the opposite of reason. Faith is not the opposite of reason. Faith is the opposite of unbelief. It's a very different distinction. So culture will think, okay, faith is just throwing out all reason and all logic and all, common sense thinking. No, faith does not mean throw away logic, reason, and common sense thinking. Faith is the opposite of unbelief. Faith is not the opposite of reason. And we need to have a safe place, especially in our society, where most people think following Jesus is poppycock. Okay? Follow him for his teachings. He's a good moral teacher. Pick and mix, okay? Just go to the sweet shop of Jesus and pick and mix the stuff that you like and the stuff that you want from the idea of who Jesus was and take a little bit of this and a little bit of that and we can all be better people, okay? That's as far as society will go. But for a lot of us and for our friends and family members and for those who we love and desperately want them to know how much Jesus loves them, for them, they've got some big questions. And we need to be a place where people can have big questions. So this series is twofold. The reason is twofold. One, we want to create a safe place for people to be able to wrestle with stuff and ask questions. And the other reason we're doing it is because we want to help equip one another. We want to talk about these things so we can support one another and equip one another in case you've got questions and in case your loved ones have questions. Because I'm going to assume here, I'm going to stick my neck out here, I assume there's people in your life who you wish would sit beside you on a Sunday. Okay, maybe I'm naive, maybe I'm wrong, but there are people in your life you would love to see sitting beside you on a Sunday. Ask yourself, why aren't they with you? What's the barrier holding them back? What can we do about it? And if we're not a safe place for people to feel where they can explore and discover and learn more about Jesus, then we'll always have an empty seat next to you, which should be reserved for the person that your heart breaks for. So can we create an environment where we have the spaces full with those who we long to see know more about Jesus? That's what we want to do, right? I mean, that's what we're here for. We're not here to just have a cool morning. I hope it is cool, but you know what I mean? So yeah, that's why we're doing this series, okay? Now, he writes in his book, there's a couple of things, a couple of principles as you become a detective. And he writes his book and he says there's a few things you need to know as a detective for when you're going to investigate any case. And he gives us 2 rules. And the first rule is this. It says, don't be a know-it-all. And understand reasonable doubt. So what does it mean? Don't be a know-it-all. Here's what it means. To be a know-it-all is to somebody who thinks they've got it figured out before you've experienced it, yeah? You know the answers before examining the evidence. Okay, let's just jump into the world of crime, right? Okay, we all want to do that, right? Yeah. Let's look at the world of crime. You know, why is this important in criminal cases? Just think for a moment how many times, in some very high-profile cases, individuals, men and women, have been put behind bars because someone was a know-it-all and thought they knew what happened. This individual, he or she was the one who did it, and they were unjustly or incorrectly incarcerated for a crime they did not commit. Maybe it was because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, or they were that type of person who would do that type of thing because of the type of person they looked like. And they got put into prison unjustly because someone thought, I already know the answer to this, rather than examining the evidence. So some of you might remember there was a case in the mid-'80s in Essex here in England. It's called the White House Farm murders. Some of you might remember this, right? Do you know about the White House Farm murders? Or was this a case in White House Farm? And there was the parents, a couple. They were murdered, and then there were the 2 young children, 2 grandchildren, 6 years old, 2 boys, twin boys, murdered, and a young girl, the mother, murdered. 3 generations in one night, taken out. It was a huge case here. Some of you remember the White House Farm murders, a huge case. And the police originally went in and they looked at it, and the individual said, "Why? Murder-suicide. We can see what's happened." Because the daughter, Sheila, was lying in one of the bedrooms, and she had a rifle with her. And so they said, right, closed case. It's obvious. Murder-suicide. She's gone in. She's killed the boys. She's killed her parents. She's killed herself. Case closed. And it was so case closed that even the press, even what was announced to the public, and these are some real headlines that were taken from newspapers whose names I will not publish for risk of being sued for defamation or whatever. So they said, former model goes berserk and massacres her family. Okay, this was not the tabloids. These were the mainline newspapers. Suicide girl. Suicide girl kills her parents, kills her twins and her parents. These are the headlines in the newspaper. See, case closed. They knew what happened. But then the case began to be investigated. The evidence, or looked at the evidence of what actually occurred and tried to explain the evidence. And when you began to really dig into it, an officer said, she's not really able to have held the gun. She wasn't big enough. And there was clearly a fight in the kitchen. And her father was 6'4", big farmer, this big farm, they had a big farm. Experienced, rough and ready, adult male, used to working hard his whole life. And she was a small person. How did she overpower her father, where this fight clearly happened in the kitchen? There's a fight that took place in the kitchen. How did she overpower this much larger man? And so they began to ask some questions. When they began to examine the evidence, they began to ask some questions. And they essentially thought they knew all of the answers before examining the evidence. And we can't do this in life. We can't do this in criminal cases. If you did this in a criminal case, you would feel so unjustly treated and unjustly, you just feel unjustly treated if something happened to you in such a way like that. But once they looked at the evidence and they actually got the explanation of what's going on, the explanation caused them to review their initial assumptions. Now, big spoiler, if you watch the series or read the book, it was the brother. He was the only surviving member of the family, and he was living at his place. He had a flat, small house a couple miles away, and he said he was there all night. In reality, he'd killed the family because he wanted the inheritance money. Sorry, spoiler. Sorry, you don't even have to, there you go. How about that? The whole story in 5 minutes. They discovered it wasn't her. It was someone else when they investigated it. Now, this is so important when it comes to faith as well. Think about it, because how many people in our lives say, well, I'm not going to, no, it's just supernatural. You're just being naive. You see, they already know it all. They know that you're just being naive and stupid because you're following Jesus. So they're know-it-all, and they just write it off. Sometimes we've done that. I don't want to hear the situation. I just know it all. Maybe if, like me, sometimes I have 4 children. No, I always have 4 children. Sorry. If, like me, who always has 4 children, sometimes things happen in my children's lives, and they do something. And me, being the know-it-all detective, think, all right, well, it's obvious who did it, and it's obvious who's guilty, and it's obvious why you did it, and it's obviously da-da-da-da-da. And I make assumptions that are actually incorrect. How do they feel? They don't feel very loved and heard or anything, do they? They feel mistreated and misjudged. And if you're a parent, you know that you've done the same thing, because this is part of Parenting 101. There's a book of how many mistakes you're going to make, and I am writing more mistakes every day. So it's tough work, yeah? When you're trying to have a conversation with your colleagues, your neighbors, your friends, your family members, the people who you're at university with, you're talking about faith, and they don't want to hear it because, don't talk to me about anything supernatural. We can't do that. And what he writes in his book is that you have to learn, when you're going to investigate something, you have to learn to not be a know-it-all. You have to learn to begin to say, right, I will examine the evidence and I'll try to understand the explanations for the evidence and digging into it. Now, these are just principles that he writes about. It tells us that's how it helps us in any case in life, but also when it comes to following Jesus. Engage the brain. We have this beautiful brain that God's given us. We have these minds that can do things. It's so awesome. So let's use it. And the second thing he talks about is understand reasonable doubt. Reasonable doubt is what's allowed in court and what the terms of court. And he looks at what reasonable doubt is, and he explains what the reasonable doubt is. And it says this I've gone off of a section. I skipped a section. I'm going to go back to that, so excuse me. Here's an instruction, going back to the court stuff. This is an instruction that the state of California gives for anyone who's on jury service. Anyone who's going to be serving on a jury service, this is the instruction that they give. You must keep an open mind throughout the trial, not let bias, sympathy, prejudice, or public opinion influence your decision. I don't know what they tell you when you serve on jury duty in the UK. I would imagine it's something similar. But in the U.S. courts of law, this is what they tell you. This is what you're given before you start jury service. Why do they do that? Because they know everybody's got their own preconceived ideas. Everybody's got biases. All of us do. We all do. And he says that when you investigate any case, you have to understand that you have to try to keep an open mind and set aside your biases. We all have presuppositions and biases, and some of our family members, they say things like this to us. It would help if I put these in the right order, wouldn't it, See, instead of it going like 1, 2, 4, it goes 1, 2, 3. So here we are. Here's some presuppositions. I don't know if you've seen these already. Christians are naive. Christians ignore science. Faith is the opposite of reason. Natural laws and forces explain everything. That's a common bias, a common prejudice, a common understanding, isn't it, when it comes to this thing? So the second thing he says we need to do is we need to understand what reasonable doubt means. What reasonable doubt means. And remember, he's an investigative officer working on cold cases, and he's going to look at the case of Christ through this. And he says you have to understand what reasonable doubt means. Understand what reasonable doubt is. And in a criminal case, it's not about removing all possible doubt, because anything is possible. Possible does not equal reasonable, because anything is possible. Okay? For example, in that scenario we talked about with the White House farm murders, it'd be possible for her, the daughter, to have killed her children and her parents. It was possible. It's possible that she was quite flexible, and maybe she instead of being able to hold the rifle with her arms, she was able to use her toe. I don't know. Yeah. So see, it is possible, But then they have to ask, is it reasonable? Just because it's possible doesn't mean it's reasonable. You're sitting on a chair. It's possible that thieves were just here overnight left for us. It's possible. It's possible this entire room is just left like this. Every Sunday we can just show up and it's ready, it's good to go. Like all these tables are out, the flasks are full of hot water. You know what I mean? That's possible, right? But it's not reasonable. Just because it's possible doesn't mean it's reasonable. What's reasonable is a whole team of people were here from about 8 o'clock this morning, setting this room up, preparing the space, getting ready for you, making sure that you have a chair that you can sit on. That's a reasonable explanation. Anything is possible, not everything is reasonable. So in the court of law, you have to prove beyond reasonable doubt, beyond reasonable. So that's just what he was trying to explain, and I hope we've got that message. And my aim this morning, as I said, my aim this morning is just to lay some foundations for the team that are going to dig into it the next few weeks. So we have to understand, when we investigate the cause of Christ, this missing corpse, this resurrection of Jesus, we have to learn to not be know-it-alls, and we have to learn what reasonable doubt means, understanding reasonable doubt. Because you don't, and it's the same here in the UK, people are not convicted when it's beyond all possible doubt. They're convicted when it's beyond all reasonable doubt. That's the term. For those who've studied law, that's the term. That you're convicted not because of all possible doubt, you're convicted because of it's been proven beyond all reasonable doubt. That's the phrase that's used in the court of law. And the standard of proof is not far-fetched in how crazy it could be, because you've watched enough crime dramas. And have you ever watched one of those shows and it gets to the end and you're like, oh, so stupid. Because even though it was possible, you know what you've just watched is like totally not reasonable. The best ones are the ones that when it all the way comes to the end and, Poirot or Columbo, and they tie all the knots together at the very end of it. They bring it all together. And then all the little pieces fall into place, and all of a sudden you understood the different things about the different characters and why she did this and why he did that and what happened there. And all of a sudden they bring it all together and they tie it up. And the writers that do it the best are the ones that craft it in such a way that it makes the most sense, because all of a sudden all of the evidence and all of the explanations point to a place where beyond all reasonable doubt, now we know what happened. And when something ends for you just because it's possible, it's annoying, right? They're the dumbest crime TV shows, which is why some of those types of shows don't last more than 1 or 2 seasons, because it's just like, people don't like them. They're not clever enough, okay? So this is true in the court of law, so we're applying it to when it comes to Christianity. And here's how you do this in investigation. So what they do is he says that what you have to do is you get 2 lists. You get 2 lists. Let's try that again, right? You get 2 lists. The first one is evidence, yeah? So we have evidence and explanations. And evidence is the pieces that we know. Evidence isn't proof of anything. Evidence is just what we know. Okay? Evidence is just what we know. Okay? My child has just come downstairs in the middle of the night. They're supposed to stay in bed. That's all I know. Oh, but they've got sick down their front. Oh, right. Okay. They're out of bed because they're sick. All of a sudden it explains what's going on, right? You ever had that experience happen as a parent? Yeah? Okay? The evidence, what we know, and then we have to explain what we know. Now, what I'm going to do on the other side of this is we're going to have a list of evidences. These are the evidences that are most commonly, this is called the minimum fact acceptance, okay? So what that means is within culture, society, the atheist, the agnostic, the skeptic, the critic, the academic, these are the most widely accepted facts or evidences that we know or that we accept about the life of Jesus. So the predominant majority of scholars accept these main pieces. And this is just like your minimum fact requirements, okay? The minimum baseline, if you like. Predominantly, all skeptics, atheists, agnostics, the majority believe or accept Jesus was a person who died on the cross and who was buried. They accept the tomb was found empty, at which no body was ever provided. No one ever showed up with a body. The disciples said that they saw Jesus come back to life. People accept that. They don't have to believe it. Okay, just because you accept it doesn't mean you believe it. Yeah, these are just the pieces of the puzzle that form the most common baseline between skeptic and believer. From devout anti to follower of Jesus. These are the baselines. The disciples said that they saw Jesus resurrected. You can't get around that. Historic documents. Jesus' disciples were so committed to their testimony, they never changed their story, and they were actually willing to die for it. So what we have to then do is we have to then dig into it, and we try to figure out some explanations to explain these types of things on this side. And I'm not going to go into all these today. These are just to sort of whet your appetite because we are going to be carrying on for the next month. So some of the explanations, and these are just common, popular, and these aren't all of them because I ran out of paper. There's lots more explanations, and people come up with explanations. For one, Jesus didn't die, he just fainted. He woke up, had a Red Bull, and then he got up and walked away, yeah? So people say that the disciples, maybe they were just so traumatized by what they'd experienced, what they saw. It was just so horrible and just ripping their guts out that they just imagined Jesus dying, and they imagined him seeing him again. They're so traumatized by the death and witnessing all that sort of horrible stuff, and it's a mess, and it's bloody, and we know historically crucifixion is a mess, and he was beaten, and we know people accept that. We know what crucifixion's like. Jesus wasn't the only person in all of the world to ever have been crucified by the Romans, okay? It happened. We know historical evidence, historical documents. So maybe they were just so traumatized by seeing something so traumatic and something so hurtful that they just imagined that Jesus, came back to life. Another explanation, a common explanation, maybe the disciples just stole the body, and they scurried away with it. And then they lied about the resurrection. Another idea is maybe because they were so traumatized that they were actually fooled by an imposter. Again, common explanations. The story of the resurrection was added on years later, and thereby becoming like a legend, becoming myth, almost, becoming this thing that was just epic, if you like. Another explanation, maybe Jesus actually rose from the dead. See, most academic scholars, archaeologists, scientists, research, accept there clearly was a movement in first century Palestine that had an impact. We know that. We know that really happened. You can't say it didn't happen. There's too much archaeological verification of people like the Apostle Paul, other people who followed, the things that happened that can be dated back to that time. So if you didn't believe that Jesus was a real person who really lived at a real time, you're in a very, 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 very small minority of academics, because that's a very small section. Most academics will agree and believe in the person. He was a real person that really lived in the real first century. We have too much evidence, too much explanations to say that he really was a real person. But the main issue is this idea of whether or not he died and came back to life. That's the main issue. That's the main thing. Now, people don't always believe that. They believe he's a teacher, believe he's a prophet, believe he was a great helper, a great moral guide, but they don't always believe that he died and was able to come back to life. And the issue of whether Jesus is more than a philosopher or more than a great teacher is actually the most important thing any of us can ever wrestle with. It's the most important thing. Because if he really, really is who he said he was, and if he really did what we say he did, that changes everything. It changes all of it. It changes everything. And this guy, the Apostle Paul, now the Apostle Paul, academics, scholars, he's a verified person who lived in real places and did real things. One of the ways that they know that some of this stuff is factual is when you read the early texts of the Bible. If you're a sociologist, you could begin to look at the names of places, the towns that are described, the coastlines that are described, the mountains, the rivers, the fact that so many people are named John or so many people are named Maria. Because all of a sudden when you look at other ancient sources which are not found in the Bible, all of a sudden they're talking about the same types of places, and there really was a mountain here, and there really was a river here, and there really was this place here. The names, the dates, locations, the people and places are all independently verified, not just from the Bible. See, so one of the other presuppositions is people say you can't explain the Bible from the Bible. You don't have to explain the Bible from the Bible because there's enough archaeological explanations and early first century documents to verify Judea was a real place, and it really did have this, and it really did have that. And these old documents are not making stuff up. This is not Tolkien writing about Rivendell. Okay? It's not John Bunyan writing about the mire and the swamp. It's a real place, verifiable places and people. And Paul's a verifiable person who was in a real place at a real time doing real stuff. And this guy, Paul, he writes this, and the letter he wrote was to a group of people who were early followers of Jesus, and he wrote this 20 years after Jesus supposedly resurrected. This is 20 years. This is 2 decades after, and he's writing this to the group of Jesus followers, and this is how important the resurrection of Jesus is, because he says this to them. He says, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, if he didn't rise from the dead, then our preaching is pointless. And so is your faith. You see, these were not people who just threw all reason out the window. These were not people who just told you to switch your brain off. Nowhere in the scriptures are you told to stop thinking critically. In fact, the opposite is true. You're told to judge things, to weigh things, to test things. You're not told to switch off your brain and all of a sudden just swallow and accept everything somebody feeds you. The opposite is true. There's more in Scripture telling you, there's nowhere in Scripture that tells you just to blissfully and blindly accept anything. Nowhere. Okay? And if anyone tells you that in faith, that's abuse. Because if something can't be tested, it can't be trusted. And you are encouraged in the Christian faith. From the very beginning, you are encouraged to test it, to wrestle with it, to think about it. And Paul even says, if it's not true, then everything we're doing is totally pointless, and so is your faith. Okay? If Jesus didn't say if the world was created in 7 days. He didn't say if somebody made a boat. He didn't say if all of the animals were saved by getting out. He didn't say he said the only thing, the main thing that matters, if Jesus did not die and was raised from the dead, then our faith is totally worthless. The preaching is pointless and your faith is worthless. You see, this is the one foundation. That's why I say this is the one thing, the most important thing, the foundational thing, the crux thing. This is the thing that is the foundation for our faith. And this is why we need to wrestle with it, but understand we live in a culture and a society. For too long, the church has treated people like they're stupid and not allowed people to think and to test and to weigh and to wrestle with stuff. And we want to be a place where people are allowed to have those types of discussions and questions. Especially as our young people get up and get ready to go into the world. If they've not been equipped, whose fault is that? So this is what we're doing, and this is why we're doing it. Now, the great author C.S. Lewis also put the same thing, but in another way. This was in his book, God in the Dock, and he wrote this: if Christianity is false, then it is of no importance. But if it's true, it's of infinite importance. It's the most important thing we can ever do. So I want to encourage you, wherever you are in your faith journey, wherever you are in your exploration or questions or wrestling, and maybe you've been a believer for a long time, and now you're just kind of thinking, this stuff is really going to help me. It's going to help me think a bit more and understand a bit more. Wherever you are, this main point of Jesus dying on the cross, being buried, and then coming back to life 3 days later is the main point. It's what it's all about. If that didn't happen, then we should all be going somewhere else. We should all go to B&Q on a Sunday morning and get our housework done because, we all have got lawns to mow, right? I mean, we should just if Jesus didn't come back to life, you shouldn't show up early and help serve. You shouldn't be involved with investing in the next generation. You shouldn't give financially of your resources, because if he didn't come back to life, the whole thing is pointless. The whole thing is pointless. And so that's why we have to wrestle with it and understand, hang on a minute, if it really did happen, this changes everything I know about everything. And so welcome, encourage you to share this with your friends, bring family members along, share them the message when it'll be on YouTube, so it's available right away. So you can pass it on to your loved ones, your colleagues. We want to create an environment where we could begin to ask some questions. Please bring them with you. Let's have a place where we can explore and support and care for one another. It is the most important thing we can ever look at. It just might change your life. It just might change their life. It's possible. So we're going to look at this for the next couple of weeks. As I said, I get to do an overview. I had the easy bit today. I get to just give an overview. And Christopher and James are going to take over for the next couple of weeks, and they're going to be looking at the evidence in more detail and also investigating some of the eyewitnesses before we wrap it up on the final week, where I will ask you to be the jury. Because it's time for you to make a decision as the jury, to be the one who decides whether we have enough to explain this or whether indeed it is pointless and worthless. So can I pray for you before we finish? Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for who you are. God, we thank you that you made us as whole beings with mind, soul, strength. God, we've got all this, we've got emotions. God, we thank you for the way that we have been made. We thank you that you're giving us a mind to be able to understand and to think. And I just pray for everyone here, whether watching online or here in the room, God, that you would just equip people and encourage them and let them know it's good to be able to think. Thank you, Father, for all that you are doing for us. I thank you that you allow us to test you. Because if you can't be tested, then you can't be trusted. God, we look into that. I just pray for everybody here. You be with them, bless them this week. Help them as they carry on their journey of faith. In your name we pray. Amen. If you have any questions about stuff, it would be great to chat together. Now, at 12 o'clock, please collect your amazing superstars. But until then, hang out with people, grab another drink, say hello. If you need to go, have an amazing, awesome, wonderful week, and we will be carrying on this case next week. So thank you very much.